Sage has a review of Until Dawn, not the remastered one that is out right now, but the original 2015 Until Dawn. Sage, what do you got to say about this
I will make a few comments about the remaster at the end of this here.
game? Okay.
First of all, have you ever played this game yourself?
No, I have not.
So this was released in 2015 on the PlayStation 4. Is developed by Supermassive. This game had a bit of a weird trajectory to eventually coming out. It was originally being made, I believe, to be like a first-person game that was specifically made to be used with like I don't know if you remember the PS3 Move controllers that had like the glowing like sphere on the end, and it was like kind of trying to be like a Wii motion controller.
Oh yeah. Did you see that story? Somebody, I think I sent you. Somebody did surgery with it. From
I did see that. That was wild. I guess they're still getting use out of them. More
yeah,
use than you probably got out of for your PlayStation, um,
yeah.
this was originally being developed on there, and then I don't know exactly why it was shifted, or if it was just that they just kept having to delay it because it was taking so long. But it got pushed back a whole generation pretty much to the PS4, and at that point they shifted gears, shifted gameplay style. You end up having this kind of fixed camera angle, almost like old school Resident Evil kind of visual style going on while you're moving the characters around. Total third person game. Um, you end up having say 8 playable characters here, and it's very much a teen slasher movie, right? Like this is a classic teen slasher type story. But two big things that make it unique versus everything else on that genre. One, it kind of slides into the subcategory where stuff like Scream or Cabin in the Woods sits. And it does mess around with tropes and kind of expectations a little bit. And it is funnier than you would maybe expect it to be. Like there's actually some really clever stuff in this game. That's just not necessarily how it looks on its surface. It looks more like a typical Friday the 13th type thing. But it's actually got some really cool twists and turns as the story goes along. And then the other thing that makes it a bit different is as a video game, it's got a little experimenting to do with the format. And it does have the kind of choose your own adventure style thing. Now, you've got a lot of games like that. Telltale's Walking Dead is another great one, people that is very beloved. But even that game, for as beloved as it is, you can't really change the outcomes so much in that game. Like it's pretty much going to happen the way it's going to happen, and some details might change along the way depending on the choices you make. But you're pretty much settled into one story path. Here, well, there are broad strokes that can't change, such as like what's going on with the killer, like what the mystery turns out to be. That's just going to be the same no matter how many times you play it. What can change is you have of these 8 characters, you can have any combination of them either be alive or dead by the time the game's over. Any of them. Nobody is 100% safe. Nobody is 100% going to die. I've done runs of this game where I have had everybody live and ones where I've gotten everybody killed on purpose just to see what it's like. So you can really mess around with that, and it makes for a very fun, especially party game experience. This game was weirdly had very little marketing when it was coming out. Like they really did not put a lot in this. I remember like catching a commercial or two, and I think I just had recently quit working at GameStop actually before this came out, and I went back to where I worked. I was like on a whim, let me just pick this up. My discount hasn't expired yet, but they're barely advertising it. It looks kind of interesting, and it ended up being like in my top 2 or 3 games the year it came out. Um, and it was kind of a sleeper hit. Like it really was a surprise to people that it was as effective, that it was as interesting as it was, and it blew up on streaming. Um, like going back to 2015, I wasn't using stuff like Twitch so much at the time, so I don't know how big Twitch was as a platform necessarily, but it seemed like this was one of the first big games I remember really blowing up and being kind of a big deal for streamers, people playing with their audience and having people vote on what just choices to make in the story and stuff like that. And so it's got a kind of a special place. And I think it's got this very interesting spot in kind of the hierarchy of like horror video games that have come out, especially because in the kind of 2010s, it, it was a weird time when horror games were kind of on a downward climb. Like we weren't really getting a lot of horror. Silent Hill hadn't really been around much except for PT, which got canceled. Resident Evil dropped Resident Evil 6 in 2012, which was infamously terrible and killed that franchise until it finally like came back in like 2017. So a good 5 years where that just was dead. Um, and yeah, like a lot of stuff just we weren't just seeing a lot of horror in general, and so this really came out at a time when it was like people like me who I'm very 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 into the horror game genre. Is this edited or is this footage from something?
This is the Until Dawn Choices interactive trailer.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't see this particular trailer myself then. I
Yeah.
didn't realize they had a live action one. Well, that's interesting. Um, but yeah, it was just it came out at an interesting time when there just wasn't a lot else happening, and it was able to get a lot of attention because of that. The unfortunate thing is Supermassive has made a number of games since this, the Dark Pictures anthology. They've released like 4 or 5 of those, like kind of mini game, like small, like half games that try and kind of replicate the style in different settings with different casts of characters. Um, and then they did The Quarry last year, which was a little bit better than the Dark Pictures, but still, it feels like Until Dawn is this really high benchmark that they keep trying to kind of live up to and recapture this lightning in a bottle moment. And it really doesn't seem like they've been able to do it. But this is a really, I think, really amazing game. I think it's something that's worth going back to for sure. To actually get into the story a little bit, you start and you've got 10 at the time at the opening, like 10 young adults. They're at a cabin on a mountain in the middle of the winter, and of course, very kind of I know what you did last summer style opening, where some of these characters play a prank on this one girl, and her sister end up the one sister that gets the prank on her, she runs out of the house embarrassed, and the sister chases after her, and they end up getting lost and dying. And then the game jumps ahead a year, and everybody kind of reuniting to celebrate these or the life of these characters and to kind of mourn them. It's like the
Um,
first time they've all seen each other since this happened.
and you mentioned the cast, so you have a all-star
Yeah,
cast
we
of
got a
people,
really big cast.
actors here. Hayden Panettiere is in this, who people might know. She was in Heroes, and she was also in the Scream movies. Rami Malek from Mr. Robot, Freddie Mercury, Brent Dalton, who people might know, Agents of Shield there as well. So you got that kind of going on. So yeah,
And
some
you have these wonderful sequences in between, like the chapters, where Peter Stormare plays this psychologist that you talk to in like first person, and he just has such a great creepy, like in Cabin in the Woods when meet the guy at the gas station and they're talking about him back in the office, and they go, there's this the reason we have the harbingers, there's this creepy old guy that basically wears a sign saying you're all gonna die, and this is totally that character in this story.
you want to play some footage right here? Is this
Sure,
kind of a
sure.
good right here?
I think this is the first one time he shows up, his office also gets progressively like weirder and more messed up looking every time you go back to him.
So you want me to go to like this one right here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Skip ahead there and see if there's any of that stuff just around him. It's still It still looks like a relatively normal office at that point. It's just the basement. And then yeah, you come right back into the room to look up. Curtains are torn to shreds.
I would like to understand your feelings toward people of fear, isolation, loneliness. Do you share this fear?
And this is
It's
like
chewing the scenery in such a great way.
yeah. And people know Peter. I mean, he's like a that guy actor. Like you've seen him in various stuff. He usually plays like your Eastern European mob boss villain guy. He was in John Wick 2. He was in that one. Is
Yeah, he ran the like auto body shop that he gets his car from in like the opening sequence of two.
yeah. So yeah, he usually that's what he usually kind of plays in movies. There. Yeah. So, you mentioned Cabin in the Woods, so it kinda has that style there, and I think Cabin in the Woods came out, I think a year before this, I wanna say, video
Oh, a
game?
couple of years. Cabin in the Woods was 2012, I believe. And I remember that because I remember seeing the Avengers and Cabin in the Woods the same year and going, "Wow, Cabin in the Woods had a way crazier third act than the Avengers."
Yeah, and then you realize, "Oh, shit, Thor, Thor's in this." I think that maybe they that helped get it released because Chris Hemsworth was in it, I
Yeah.
think that's part of the reason there. So, yeah,
Well,
Cabin
I
in the
believe
Woods was really cool.
it was originally meant to come out in 2008, I think, and they got shelved for a few years.
Yeah, that's one of the cases that got shelved and comes out and is actually a great movie, it's not like
Thank God it
Borderlands.
got released.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they could have shelved Borderlands. We didn't need that.
So yeah, so it has that. So Until Dawn kind of has that story of like very much a not. I wouldn't say not maybe a parody of horror movies, but an homage to horror movies and playing within the tropes
Yeah.
of horror movies. There.
I guess I'd also say it's probably closer to Scream than it is to Cabin in the Woods because
Okay.
Scream takes itself a little slightly more seriously than Cabin in the Woods, at least the first Scream, where it's funny, it does the trope deconstruction thing, just like Cabin in the Woods does. But Cabin in the Woods takes it to such an 11th degree where it's like Cabin in the Woods could basically be a sequel to any other horror movie. Whereas I think Until Dawn plays with the tropes in a way that is more similar to how Scream does it, where it doesn't feel like it is just like the end all be all like of horror stories, the way that I think Cabin in the Woods positions itself. But it is very clever and it's got some really interesting stuff. You have a killer thing, you've got a creature feature thing, you've got a little bit of a saw thing. There's a lot of gory deaths in here too, and like I said, that's not even a spoiler because any of these characters can die, any of them can live. The way that this plays out can change so completely by the time it's over, and it's got an incredible replay value for that reason. Now, the first maybe couple hours I could see being a little slow, which maybe not everybody's going to want to replay because that opening section is maybe just a little slow paced. But once it really gets going, I mean, there's a lot of different ways and paths you can take. They even, they even try and like really psych you out in certain ways with your choices that get characters killed. Like, I believe Matt he's the played by Jordan Fisher in the game. He's kind of the jock character, and there's a bit where you go up to this radio tower, and you find a flare gun, and if you use it, what would you think if you find a flare gun? You climb up a radio tower because you're like, all right, this is the best thing we can do to get help right now. You find a flare gun. Would you use the flare gun on top of the radio tower?
I would. Yeah, I think that would be get help.
It seems like so. That's what I did, right? It seems like exactly what you'd want to do. Unfortunately, that seals that character's death in stone, like 4 or 5 hours before it actually happens in the game. Because if you don't use it, he has a flare gun to defend himself with, like several hours later in the game. Um, so it's like the game will kind of do things where it's kind of trying to trick you, and then it encourages that replay value, like I mentioned. Um, but yeah, like you said, you have a really great cast here. Rami Malek, I would say, and along with Peter Stormare, is a really big standout. Um, do we want to talk full spoilers since this game is like 10 years old? Or
Yeah.
Okay. So so the big thing, right, is these two girls that are part of the group, they die in the opening of the game, right? They get lost. There's a prank, very mean prank. They get lost in the woods, they die, and everybody else comes back a year later to like kind of mourn their death, have like a celebration of life. And Rami Malek plays Josh, who is the brother to the two sisters that die. And
Okay.
you know, you get this kind of like saw killer thing going on for like kind of the first half of the game, and it's clear, very clear. Oh, somebody's punishing them. It's very I know what you did last summer, and then they get to a point where they pull the mask off, and nobody's died yet. It's all been like a very elaborate like prank, right? Because that's
Mm.
what they did to his sisters, and they drop little hints about him being like this movie effects guy and his dad owning like a movie effects studio, and so they set it up really well. And he turns out to be your kind of Saw serial killer, except he's not actually killed anybody. He's off his meds. He is kind of losing his mind, and he wanted to scare everyone as revenge. But then it cuts away over to and it's actually Brett Dalton's character. Him and his girlfriend, they depart from the rest of the crew very early, and something like grabs her head and yanks her out a window. So the whole time you think, oh, this serial killer, whatever's going on, is doing this, and that's some sort of human killer. And then this reveal happens, and you go like, oh, well then wait, what happened over with these other two characters? And then you played a little bit of footage that had that creature, and it turns out that this mountain is infested with wendigos, and it turns into like a full blown creature feature, and it's got some really good like the creatures, the way they move around. They have this just very uh they have like a predator kind of vision kind of, and they're like totally locked in on like motion. So there's also a mechanic in the game where you have to like hold the controller still at a bunch of points, just not move at all. And that you could, if you mess that up, right, that could be a way to get characters killed. um but yeah, you have these nasty looking creatures. They move around in ways that they're really cool. It's almost like they have a different frame rate than like the people because of the way
Mm.
they just move around so weird and fast. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's got such a really cool rug pull with this. Oh, it's like a Saw thing. Oh no, this is like an old school creature feature, is what it kind of turns into in the second half. Yeah, it's a really great kind of mid game twist that they do.
Mm. Looks a bit like the vampires from Blade a little bit. Blade 2. Kind of
Oh, with
like
like
that.
the way the mouth opens.
Yeah. Kind of like that a little bit. Mm. Yeah. Something like Guillermo del Toro type creation there.
Oh, I
Um,
could totally see that being a Del Toro inspired kind of creature effect. And these things are, of course, they're spirits. There's a lot of Wendigos in like certain Native American legends. And they're typically products of cannibalism. It's like a person that
mm,
commits cannibalism, and the like spirit of the Wendigo possesses their body when they succumb to that temptation. And so then the kind of like alpha Wendigo is one of the sisters that was like lost and supposedly died and went missing in the year before. And so you get these just yeah, really really great like Saw movie, like, do you want to play a game kind of like fake out transitioning into a creature feature. And then the way that it plays with tropes in that transition is just, I don't know. I think it's very clever. I think the first time through, it does a lot of things you don't necessarily expect. And I also think the game, you tell me what you think here, but looking at this footage from a 10-year-old game here, I think it holds up very well. I think it still looks really good.
yeah. And then some people saying with the remaster, it kind of messes with the look of the game. Let me play the trailer of the
That's
remaster.
exactly what I was gonna when I said I had things to say about the remaster. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So this is a comparison trailer right here. I think it's just comparing the PS5 and yeah, PC versions of the game there.
Okay.
But this is the remaster. So what is the remaster? How does it differ as far as looks wise from the
So
2015?
so where it is an improvement is that the character models do look more detailed. The lighting engine is a lot better. So there's certain shots where the lighting is, I mean, like clearly superior in this remaster.
Oh,
Like that's a
they do a
shot.
side by side. Okay, good. All right.
Yeah, so like there's shots there that look really good, and the stuff in the trailer is probably mostly going to look pretty good. But there's a lot of other scenes where, at other points in the game, where like the original has this kind of blue hue over it,
Right here.
which in
Like a little bit right
like yeah, a lot of the scenes where there's like really strong lighting do look genuinely better in the remake, in the remastered version. But there's a lot of scenes I've seen footage of where there's not a lot of lighting, like you're just kind of wandering totally in the dark. And it's kind of like, if you like tried to do a remastered print of the Matrix and you just completely took the green color filter out of the whole thing.
Mm,
And
okay.
so there's a kind of a blue filter color grading on a lot of the scenes in the original. And
Like right
looking at the
here.
remake, yeah,
Yeah.
like that's a good example. And then the remake, it's very orange, it's very
Yeah.
warm, and it just gives a very, it just gives a very different vibe than what it felt like artistically the original was going for. So it's one of those things where it does look better on certain technical levels, but it kind of reduces the artistry of the visuals from the original, if that makes sense.
Mm, okay. Yeah. You see the comparison right here between like the blue hue, orange type hue right there with it kind of going on.
Yeah.
Uh,
And like I said, the character models do look better in the new one, at least for the most of the footage I've seen. But you lose a certain tone when you start messing with color grading, and that just can be a little weird. I'd still maybe play the other thing is this remaster is like a full $60. It's not like, oh, if you have the original, it's $10 to get like the upgraded version or something like that. It's like, no, it's $60. It's a brand new, it's like listed as full brand new retail price game, which I just feel like is a little much considering I don't think it looks like that much better. And in certain ways looks a little worse, right? At least on that artistic sense. Another part too is a lot of some of the music from the original games also gone or changed. Um, the opening like kind of credit sequence has the cover of the "Oh Death" that it started in the "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," and then it's been used and covered in a bunch of stuff. Supernatural used it at one point. But Until Dawn is a really good cover of that song in its opening credits, and that's just completely missing from the remaster. And then there's another thing it does too, where there was like some kind of deleted scenes or unfinished sequences that kind of were cut from the original game, and so there's some new scenes added into the remaster that it tries to kind of make the game a little longer, a little more expansive. And I've watched some of the footage, and you ever watch deleted scenes on like a DVD, and you're
mm,
like, yeah, I know why these are deleted.
mm, okay.
That's kind
Yeah.
of the feeling I had here, where I'm like, these feel superfluous. Like it's cool to see extra stuff like this, but maybe it should have been in like maybe you should have released the remaster with a special features tab, and like you could go look at deleted scenes instead of like editing them into the full game and having you sit and look at all these, because to me it feels like it really hurts the pacing of the game. It makes it feel like certain parts, like especially the intro, there's this like I mentioned, they kind of the whole intro is the year before the rest of the game takes place. There's this prank they do, and in the original it's like 30 seconds you see them like hiding and setting up a video camera to prank this girl. And in the remake it's like it feels like a 10-minute scene that's like set to music of them like partying, like, and then at the end of the partying and dancing set to like what honestly sounded like kind of not very good, like license free like imitation pop music. And then they get to setting up the prank at the end of that sequence. So it feels like one color grading is off. It hurts the artistry and the tone of the game. they put these deleted scenes in that extend the game, but in a way that doesn't really work and it hurts the pacing. And then, sure, the lighting's better and the character models look a bit better. Oh, and then, yeah, the one last thing I did want to mention is I did see some clips of certain scenes where even though the character models look better, it seemed like the movements, like the facial animation of the expressions, was less expressive than the original. Even though the model is more detailed, it seemed like the actual expressiveness was lesser than the original. So that's another weird slight against the remaster.
Let me see. Let me see if I can get a good comparison there with it. It seems like, yeah. So I'm looking up some of these reviews for the remastered one. I showed that Mirror article right here where it says, "Until Dawn on PS5 is a lesson in how not to do a video game remake." Right there. And then you also have IGN. If you trust IGN, they gave the original one a 7.5, and they gave the remake just a 5. They gave it that one. So has it been kind of negative reaction to this remastered right
I,
here?
I've seen a decent amount of negative reaction to it. I mean, some of it stems from this game's 9 years old. Like I think if you're gonna do a remake of a game, I think it needs to at least be 10 years old. I think that needs to be like the minimum. You should not be remaking things that are less than a decade old. Like Silent Hill 2 just happened, right? We just reviewed that last week. 23-year-old game. Great time for a remake. This is 9 years old. The original still looks very good. In certain ways, it looks better too. Again, and in certain specific ways, it looks like a better game than the new one. Um, and then also it being at a full $60 price point when it's not that obviously not that massive of an upgrade. If this came out and it was like $10 to get the newer version, I would be much more inclined to. Well, and a lot of games have that, right? Like you do The Last of Us when they did The Last of Us Part Two
So
remaster earlier this year. If you owned the original, it was just a $10 thing to get the new version, right? And a lot of games do that. A lot of PlayStation games, at least, will give you this $10 upgrade path.
so we mentioned the
Um,
mouth. Is this kind of a good example here? Like the mouth is kind of off a little bit.
Yeah. The mouth doesn't seem like it's moving as much. The
Hmm.
cheeks don't feel like they're moving as much. The eyes don't seem like they're quite as alive as they are in the original. It feels like it feels like it's just missing some of its soul a little bit.
Mm, okay. Yeah. I see that a little bit here. Yeah, with it. Actually, I'm gonna play this real quick. This is kind of a good example of it. I think what you're talking about. Hold on just a minute here. Let me fast forward there. Uh, kind of see that. Hmm. Yeah.
Even the camera angles, honestly, even are a little more dynamic and just feel like they're moving more in the
Mm,
original versus the camera seems very static. And then that's another change too is during a lot of gameplay, the camera is like right behind the character's back, like you'd expect in modern Resident Evil or in like the Silent Hill 2 that just came out. But Until Dawn is a game that does not feature combat, not very much, and not in like a traditional way. It's a game mostly you're walking around looking for like clues, or if there is combat, it's in more of like a quick time event sort of way. And so in the original, it's a lot of like fixed camera angles, right? Like the old school Resident Evil style. But here it works really well. I think. I mean, a lot of people would say it works very well in old school Resident Evil as well. But I think in Until Dawn, especially, it works really well because you're not trying to solve puzzles or engage in combat with enemies really. You're just moving around the environments. And so the fixed camera angles during gameplay give this very nice cinematic presentation that makes it feel more like a movie. The camera angles are changing as you walk between rooms. It's always like a view from a corner. There's a moment I remember where you walk behind like into like a secret room behind a bookshelf, and like the camera is like from the perspective of like a security camera, and then like a spider crawls over the camera lens, but it's still while you're playing the game. And so there's all these really great touches to that presentation in the original, and in this remake, just positioning the camera directly behind the character, like in your typical like modern Resident Evil, it really takes away a lot of that dynamic presentation, and it makes it a lot less interesting to look at. And especially, I mentioned before, this was a game that was really big with like streamers, or even though it's a single player game, a lot of people would like get in a room and play it together. They'd pass the controller, when it switches to different characters, and having that dynamic, fixed camera presentation made it a lot more engaging for like whoever's not playing to actually sit and watch it like it's a movie. Like this was one of those games where like, I'm not, like at a party, if I had like a bunch of friends over, I'm gonna try and play like Smash Bros. Or something where I pass some controllers around, right? Not a one player game where only I'm sitting there playing and everybody else just watches. But Until Dawn was the kind of game where if you did that, all the people in the room were actually super cool with it because it was a really engaging, visually presentive way to express the story in the game. And so that's just another element that the remake kind of messed up on.
It's like you get to make your own horror movie.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's got this huge character even early on, like gives you like a spiel about the butterfly effect, and he sounds like a total stoner while he does it. But that you have so many ways that this could play out, and having everybody vote on the decisions is super fun, and like that's still going to be there in the remake, right? Like certain those elements, you can't really mess that up. So like it's not that the remake messes up just every single detail or every element, um, but yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like they get enough right, or they get enough of it feels like a genuine upgrade for it to really be worth investing in. I say just get a copy of the original. It's going to be it's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper. You're going to be able to get that sucker for 10, $20 probably. I would say
Uh,
no more than that.
let's check it out. What is the price of the Until Dawn here? Yeah, I see it. Let's see. You get pre-owned at GameStop. You can get it for $18.
That's not bad. For a
Yeah.
while, and they don't have this anymore, but for like the first 2 years of the PlayStation 5, if you had PlayStation Plus, there was just a whole catalog of free games. First Last of Us was in there, and Until Dawn was one of those too. So there's also a lot of people that just got the original game just for free because it was just part of that like set of free games for signing up for the PlayStation membership. So you're also trying to sell this game. It's a worse looking remaster at full retail price to an audience that had 2 years to get this for free, an honestly better looking version of the same game for free, not that long ago.
Yeah.
So
Amazon, it's part of the PlayStation Hits collection. It's 28.50, so about $30. Say you can get it for that price right there. And people might say, well, there's already kind of a newer version of Until Dawn called The Quarry. That also has like kind of the same kind of concept as well. Some actors there that mostly known from movie shows come in and do it
yeah,
there. And that came out
Brenda
with a
Song and Ed Raimi are both in that one.
yeah, it doesn't have also the other woman from Agents of Shield in there. The one who played Quake, isn't she in that or no?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah, so I heard that one wasn't as good as Until
I
Dawn.
played it. I thought it was okay. I thought it was just okay. Like I said, this Studio Supermassive, they've done yeah, counting the Quarry, they've done like 6 other games since Until Dawn came out. And the other 5 are all part of the Dark Pictures anthology, which is also the same thing, right? Same style of thing, same concept. But I don't think they've been able to recapture Until Dawn. I think there's something really special about Until Dawn, the way that the cast comes together, the way that the story comes together. The story's very clever. It's got real twists that I don't think you see coming that first time through, and it does. And also doing like the Wendigo as a monster is like, oh, I don't see that very often. That's cool. That's just different than like your typical thing. Whereas kind of, I mean, I think a lot of the other stuff they've done, the Quarry included, it feels a lot more basic. Feels a lot more just kind of what you expect. Just a lot more simple. And then and they're lower budget too. The rest of these games, Until Dawn also had funding directly from Sony. It was co-produced by Sony. That's why it's an exclusive. Um, so in all these other games like The Quarry, you end up having and what's his
David
name
Arquette.
from Scream?
David Arquette, yeah.
Yeah, David Arquette. Yeah, he was in that one as well.
Justice
Um,
Smith was also in this.
Justice Smith, Lynn Shay from the Insidious movies was also in this one.
Yeah,
Um,
the
but
animation looks good. A lot of the graphics look really good.
yeah, the character models look good, the animation looks good, but there's something in all of these other games that this studio's done. There's something that's off about the editing, and the way that the acting actually comes out of the characters. There's always something a little more awkward or just a little more wooden about the
Mm,
performances. And I don't know if it's a budget thing, it's a sound mixing thing, if it's a direction thing in the sound studio, or if it's a few of those things combined. But they always just have a little bit of an uncanny valley thing. Whereas like Until Dawn to me still, even being 10 years old, it doesn't have that. It feels way more organic. It feels like everything comes together in a way that just doesn't have that off feeling to it that the rest of the things that the studio's done have. And I keep rooting for them. I keep hoping that they'll put something else out that is as good as Until Dawn, or at least kind of approaching that level. But to me, it kind of feels like they came out with their best one first, and since then they've spent the last decade trying to chase that high. They haven't really been able to recapture it.
mm, okay. So, what would be your rating for the 2015 Until Dawn?
I think honestly, I give it like a high peak. The only reason I don't go a little higher is that from a gameplay perspective, it can be a little simple at times. That opening hour or two can be a little slow paced on a replay. Once you've already kind of know what's going on, it could take a little time to get going. But I think especially on a first time experience, it all works really well. It's got a lot of replay value because of the different ways things can play out. It's got a lot of replay value because it's a really good game to play with your friends. It's a good game to stream with an audience, have people vote on choices to make. The acting, all the performances, I think, are really solid all around. It's got a very clever story. It's got pulls the rug out from under you more than once. It has a really great creature feature gore to it, if that's your kind of thing. It's also got the slasher stuff, if that's your kind of thing. Um, and yeah, I think it's got just so much about it clicks together. It feels like a lightning in a bottle sort of achievement. Perfect storm of elements that just work. It would honestly probably go on, like, if I made a top 10 list of like horror video games, it would go on there, and it might even make the top five.
Mm, wow. Okay. So high praise from Sage. He gives Until Dawn 2015 a peak there.
I haven't
Great.
played the remake, but my instinct is to skip it just based on the press.
Yeah. Well, remastered, not a remake. Remastered.
Right.
Um,
Well, it's weird because they keep referring to it as a remake at certain times, and then they would call it a remaster at other times, and it's like, you make up your mind. You pick
yeah.
one. Call it something. Just
So,
pick
what
what
makes
you
a
want.
game like a remake? What makes a game a reboot? What makes a game a remaster?
In my opinion, a remaster is you take a game that already exists and you just go in, you improve the textures. Just you maybe you make the lighting a little bit better, but you're not redoing anything except for prettying it up a little bit. To me, that's a remaster.
Like The
A
Last of Us.
remake, yeah, like where you're taking exactly what it
Okay.
is and you're just making it look better. A remake is something like Resident Evil 2 or Silent Hill 2, where you are taking a game, but and yeah, you might be using a lot of what's there to build, but you are making it from scratch. You're designing every asset from scratch. You're creating the character models from scratch. You are casting actors to play these roles from scratch, to record dialogue from scratch. Um, and then a reimagining is a
Or reboot.
tricky one. I'd say
Like Tomb Raider would be a reboot, like because it's
Tomb Raider's a reboot. Yeah, that's not trying to retell the same story from the old game. That's telling a whole new story. Like that's just doing something new with the franchise. Um, and then like Final Fantasy VII, I would call a reimagining because it's not just a remake. It's like a sequel with like time travel and like weird multiverse stuff that wasn't in the original. Where it's like, okay, this is not just the story from the original retold. We're actually doing like a full-on sequel here. So that's how I would classify those things personally. But I think those terms get thrown around a lot in the industry in general, especially from like game studios and game developers, and they sometimes it seems like they just say the term, and it's not like they're not basing it on anything specifically. It's just whatever they've decided to throw on as a label, but without really thinking about what it means.
Mm,
So
yeah. That seems to be the new thing. A lot of these remaster, remakes, reboots. There. Yeah, seems like the new
if they're
thing.
good, I'm happy to get them. Silent Hill 2 is the perfect example of why remakes do, I think, need to happen. Game preservation, right? Making stuff accessible, things that are very old, at this point, getting significant upgrades because it's been so long since they came out that the technology has changed. 4 console generations since they came out, something like that. And then Until Dawn seems to be like the exact opposite, and it's the exact negative kind of like a corporate greedy remaster where you're not providing anything new for me here. You are just trying to make a quick buck off this property. And the
Mm.
game did not sell this remaster did not sell very well. So I mean, I don't know if they learn a lesson from that or not, but let's cross our fingers and hope.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And we're gonna have another big remake coming out, Metal Gear Solid. There. Would
Yeah,
you say
and
that's
that one's interesting.
yeah? Would you say that's a remaster because they keep the same dialogue and the same story? So would you say it's a remaster?
That's an interesting one. It's because it feels kind of in between because they have remade all of the assets from scratch, right? They have like the environments and the character models. Those are made from scratch, but then they are keeping all the old voice acting and they are keeping like the geometry of the levels. But then they're also designing like a whole new control scheme and like actual control system to play the game. And that's also being designed from scratch. So that's a weird one. That's like kind of in the middle. It's like half one, half the other. I feel like we might need a new term for that one.
Okay. So that was Until Dawn. Heading out of here.